So your scene should be looking something like this. Right now we're gonna go into lighting and rendering, and before we do that, we're gonna model one last element that will work as our light source. And the reason why I want you to model this is because I also want you to learn one last modeling technique that is a little bit more freehand. It's a little bit more of an additive process, and it will help you when you want to model more experimental or abstract shapes. So I'm gonna go ahead and create a let's go ahead and create a cylinder, and make sure you're in your modeling submenu, and let's move this cylinder out of the way. And let's zoom in here. And now if you go to Mesh Tools, select Insert Edge Loop. Insert Edge Loop is basically similar to adding subdivisions, but you can decide where exactly you want this subdivision to be. So for example, if I click and drag on my vertical subdivision along my y-axis, I can choose to create a horizontal subdivision wherever I want to locate it. If I wanted to create a vertical subdivision instead of a horizontal one, I would go again to Insert Edge Loop, and this time instead of dragging over my vertical axes, I would drag over my horizontal one to create a vertical subdivision. So the only thing you need to know is that if you want it to be horizontal, you have to drag it perpendicular to that along a vertical subdivision. If you want it to be vertical, you need to drag it along a horizontal subdivision. And the reason why inserting edge loops is really helpful when 3D modeling is because you can start to subdivide your starting geometry at specific points where you think you will need to kind of drift off from. So for example, if I wanted to create a coffee mug and I wanted to make the handles, I could decide to add subdivisions at the top and bottom to extrude maybe my handles from there, just as an example. So I'm going to go ahead and go to object mode, and I'm going to delete the cylinder, and let's start over now that we know where this tool is. So again, go to create, polygon primitive, and cylinder. Let's move it out of the way, zoom in, and I want to create a candlestick because this is going to be a light source in my scene, and it's going to help me create this rendering and this image that I want. So with your cylinder, let's go ahead and think of how we want it to be. I'm imagining something with a round base and then a vertical element that grows upwards, but maybe it grows in different directions and is somewhat of an abstract geometry. I want to have more of a playful shape. So I'm going to go ahead and first scale this down a bit because it's going to be my base. And actually, I don't need to scale it down. I'm going to leave it here at that original size, and I'm going to create a couple of edge loops for this. So my first edge loop will create the base element for my candlestick. And then I want it to grow vertically and break at different points and maybe drift off in different directions, kind of like a skewed object. So if I wanted to break at 3 points, maybe I need to have 3 more subdivisions. So let's go ahead and create all of these elements. So go to Mesh Tools, Insert Edge Loop, and I want to have my subdivisions at this horizontal axis. So this is my first one. And you can see that I'm still under that same function. My mouse is still under the edge loop function, so I don't need to go back to create. As soon as I exit from this, going to object mode, then I'll need to go back and go to create edge loop. But for now, I'm still in it. So let's go ahead and create my first breaking point, and then maybe my second one will be here, and my third one will be here. So now I'm going to go to object mode, and you can see how my subdivisions are not symmetrical, right? Or they're not equal subdivisions. They're all different. I'm going to go to edge mode here, or under my modeling toolkit, whichever one you prefer. And I'm going to select this, whoops, I'm going to hit undo because I didn't go to object mode. I didn't exit my create edge loop. So to make sure you exit, just click on this selection tool. You can see before I was on this function, which is the last tool we were using, the edge loop. But if I click on this arrow, I should be completely out of it. So now I'm going to go to edge, and I'm going to select this first ring, and now I'm going to scale it in. And maybe move it down. So now I have the base of my candlestick, and I'm going to select this next edge and scale it down. Maybe I want to scale down all of these edges except for these bottom ones. If you need to deselect, you hit Control and select the edges you don't want to have selected. Okay, so now I'm scaling everything down. And now I want to go ahead and maybe grow this top part a little bit so that I can make my candlestick taller. So I'm going to go to edge. Actually, I'm going to go to vertex. It's easier to select this whole top with vertex. And hit W and just stretch it up. And then select this next row and stretch it up. Okay, so these are the different breaking points that I want to have in my design. So this first one, I'm going to kind of skew it to the left, and then this next one, I'm going to skew it to the right. You would probably be able to model this with any other technique. You don't really need edge loop in order to get this shape. You could also work with just regular subdivisions, or you could work with extrude. There's different ways, again, of getting around one same shape or design. And in the end, it's all about your own preference and the way that your mind works and how you kind of start to imagine how shapes need to be constructed, and then the logic behind that, and then the functions that would help you get there. I just wanted to show you this extra function because for some of you it may be a little bit more easy to work with. It's basically a logic of adding subdivisions in order to kind of deconstruct and add on to your shape. So I have the base of my candlestick, and now let's create a candle. So I'm going to go to Create, Polygon Primitives. I'm going to create another cylinder that needs to be scaled down and then up in Y. And I'm going to move my pivot point so that it's at the bottom and so that I can center it up here. So if I hit D and V again and I drag it down, I'm going to zoom in. I want to drag it right to the center. So hit D and V again and drag it right to the center. Now I'm going to zoom out and I'm going to snap it to the center of my candlestick. Now the last element I'm going to make is the light source, which could be kind of the fake fire element up here. So for that, I'm going to create a sphere, and then I'm going to scale this down. I'm going to move it out of the way, and I'm going to work with face and soft select so that I can grab the top of my fire or light source and stretch it up a bit, just so that it resembles more to the way fire looks, or maybe even like a fake candle with an LED light. So I'm going to place my sphere correctly, and then I'm going to select maybe these faces, and with soft select on, I'm going to drag the top. This isn't really resembling fire too much. I'm going to undo this and maybe only soft select this very top part. Maybe I need to even select less. Maybe we only select this first ring. So let's go in and select this first ring. And now we want to make soft select a little bit bigger so that it grabs maybe half of my sphere. This is much better. Okay, so this looks kind of like the light source. I'm going to change my pivot point to the bottom by hitting D and V and then dragging it to the center. And now that it's correctly located, I can just snap my light source to the correct place. And maybe it needs to scale down a bit. And we want to snap it right to the center. Okay, we have a huge candle that we want to scale down. So to do that, first let's group all of these elements together. So let's select all of them and go to Edit, Group, and let's rename our group and call it Candle. And now you can see the pivot point for the entire group by default goes to 0. If we open up this folder, we'll see that the pivot point of each element is where it was last located. So let's drag this pivot point to this center bottom part of our design. And now that it's there, we can scale everything down as a group. And now we can snap it, move it and snap it up to the tabletop. And then place it wherever you want to locate it. So it's still a little bit big. I'm going to make it a little smaller. Okay, here we go. So now we have two elements that can be light sources